Shane Stacks on the radio.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
Shall we play a game?
Why, yes. I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky in Little Rock. It's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for tuning in, whether you're listening live on December 21st at 1 p.m. Central on 101.1 FM The Answer in Little Rock, or via the online stream at 1011fmtheanswer.com, or if you're listening delayed by podcast or on Krypton Radio or on YouTube or one of the other ways the show goes out. I'm just so glad to have you today. Got a treat. We're going to be talking with William Meinhardt, who has the largest collection of fantasy tabletop RPG material in the world. He's been collecting since he was 16 years old, which is amazing. He had the foresight to do that. So we'll be talking about that. And we cover a lot of different ground. This is an interesting discussion, both for veteran players of tabletop RPGs and those that are just curious to learn more, and also those that are just curious about collecting and the various things that go into collecting as a labor of love. And William, as you'll learn, collects to preserve these materials, these tabletop role-playing games, as pop culture and cultural artifacts, which is becoming more and more important. Also want to give a quick shout out to John Peterson, all-around cool guy and author of Playing at the World and co-author on Art and Arcana, the history of D&D told through its art. John introduced William and I appreciate that very much. Thank you, John. With no further ado, we're going to jump right into it. All right, everybody, this is Bill Meinhardt, who I had the pleasure of meeting thanks to a very kind introduction by John Peterson of Playing at the World, who's no stranger to this show. I had the pleasure of meeting Bill at a table. I think it was my birthday, actually, at North Texas RPG Con. The evening was winding up, and I was headed to my room, I was headed to the bar area to get some food. And John was sitting with some folks and motioned me over. And among other interesting people there, Bill Meinhardt was there. I think showed up right after I did with a big sort of backpack that we'll get to here in a second. And Bill, as it turns out, is probably, I mean, it sounds like Bill has the largest fantasy RPG collection, period. And we'll get to that more here in a second, and learn more about how he got into that. But he's also just a fun guy to talk to. I'll link this in the show notes. If you've seen the video with John Peterson, where he visits with a RPG collector and looks at brown box D&D, OD&D, and they're literally like treating these things like historical artifacts, like in a museum. That was Bill. From what I understand, his house is like doubles as a archive and museum to fantasy RPGs. So with no further ado, Bill, welcome to Shane Plays.
Thanks, Shane. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, I think, as we said a couple of days ago, it's been the most satisfying and strenuous game of phone tag either of us have ever played.
That's right.
So it was a lot of fun. I appreciate you making the time. It was fascinating to meet you, and also Alex Kammer, who is a pretty serious collector. From what I understand, I think your collection, at least on the pure fantasy, is the biggest. But Alex Kammer, who also does Gamehole Con and some other things, he's got a pretty interesting collection as well. So meeting both of you was really interesting. And I think, if I remember right, it was either you or Alex told me the 4 top collectors were all at North Texas RPG Con this past time. Because I remember you pointed somebody out to me. But evidently, like, some of these cons, there's a few of you that, like, hang out in shadowy rooms with cigar smoke and everything. And
it's not quite that clandestine.
and you're very serious about your collecting. So I definitely want. Oh, go ahead.
It's been a museum to me for 40 years. That's always how I viewed it. I thought this stuff belonged in a museum, like young Indiana Jones there. And so from when I was 16, I thought, I'm going to preserve this stuff and archive it because it deserves preserving and archiving. So that's been the raison d'etre of most of my adult life is preserving this stuff.
And see, that really is encouraging to me. Also Alex and yourself both, you don't collect just to say I have a big collection. You're attempting to preserve, for future generations and not just have them, but, preserve them in a museum quality state, so that we'll have this stuff. Now I have to ask a question, but before I do that, I have to say it fascinates me that you had the foresight to start doing this at age 16.
Well, a lot of that had to do with my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law started going to Gencon at Gencon 2 with my sister. And so he already had a huge historical war game collection and miniature collection. So when I started going to Gencon with them, I was going to go to Gencon 10 at the Playboy Club. And
whoa! At the Playboy, I never knew that one of the Gen Cons was at the Playboy Club.
Yeah, the first ones were at the Horticultural Hall,
right?
And then Gen Con 10, they needed a bigger venue, so it was going to be at the Playboy Club in 1977. And my mom found out and said, "You are not going to the Playboy Club, young man," to my 11-year-old self. So I did not get to go to Gen Con 11.
Well, but, did they actually have was they just using the space, or was Hugh and the bunnies there? What was going on?
Hugh wasn't there, but bunnies are certainly walking around taking that drink.
This deserves a show on its own. Oh my goodness!
Get to go. But the Holmes box debuted at that Gen Con, and so my sister and brother-in-law came back with me with a present of the Holmes box, and I loved D&D from the second I got the box. And I had already loved Tolkien, so the synthesis of the two, my brother-in-law had this huge 3,000 game war game library, and I realized I could never catch up to him in terms of war games, so I said, I'll start collecting this role-playing stuff. And so I started getting everything that came out at starting then. And it was a few years later I decided to try to get one of everything ever printed in the English language that was fantasy role-playing.
That's really cool. So I could do a whole show on a Gen Con at the Playboy Club, and that's going to happen. I have to just track down the right people. I'm sure that really broke Gary Gygax's heart to have it at the Playboy Club. Anyway, I'm just going to stay on target and get us back out of potentially troubled waters. I have to ask also, before I forget, you said that, you was like young Indiana Jones. Have you ever, or do you think you'll ever have to fight Nazis on a boat in order to get one of your role-playing collection items?
No, you mentioned the other collectors. We're actually very friendly.
Right.
There was only one of the people who has the top collection was not there because he doesn't come stateside very often. But the rest of us are a fairly tight-knit, friendly group. Mm-hmm. So, and we are looking to preserve. So, I had the advantage that for about the first 15 years of my collecting career, I was the only person who was doing this. I mean, other people wanted individual items, but I was always willing to outpay them because I saw their value as 100 times what other people were seeing as the value of these items.
Right.
So I didn't have to pay 100 times, but I saw the value as that. So now the costs of many of these items are catching up to where I thought that their value should have been. Fortunately for me, I have almost all of them. So. But no, we're a friendly group. We're all friends.
Yeah, I could tell. I mean, it definitely seemed like it when we were at North Texas. And North Texas, I mentioned it a lot on the podcast. I really enjoyed that convention, and I plan to make it a yearly thing. You
should. It's a great convention.
Really is. It's big enough that there's plenty of games to play, but it's small enough that it's very intimate. And there's a lot of gaming people that are in the know of role-playing games. There's a lot of names there to be recognized, but nobody's a prima donna. It's great. Loved it so much.
You mentioned when we sat at the table there, which was a tiny little cocktail table. It was Zeb Cook, Steve Winter, yourself, John Peterson, myself, and then Alex joined us. So yes, that's what the con is like. People, titans of our industry from 40 years ago, sitting there with the likes of us sitting at the table, all talking and gaming together. It's wonderful.
I love it. And since we've set the stage for the table and the little cocktail table and everything, one of my favorite moments, and I genuinely mean this, I loved this. I was like, I immediately like this guy. We're all sitting there, and you were somebody said, like Alex or somebody said, "Hey Bill, do you have it on you?" And you kind of smiled and unzipped your backpacker and pulled out this huge binder. Bam! And it's a hard copy of your entire collection.
Yes,
I love that.
There are about 13,000 items in my collection now.
Wow.
And, I wanted to mention something we were just talking about. I basically have no doubles. If I get a double, I want to pass it along to one of my friends because I'm not trying to be a hoarder. I do want the best condition copy of something. Right. Beyond that, I want one of my friends to have it, so it's not all just, at my house. I'm not looking to have 3 of whatever. I'm just looking to have the best of whatever, and then I'd rather have one of my friends have it.
All right. Well, let's back up a little bit, and I do definitely want to come back to your collection. And before we finish, I want to ask you what, is your personal, deep in your heart, prize jewel of your collection. But I want to back up a little bit and talk about just your experience as a tabletop role player.
Okay.
And I know that you said that your brother-in-law braved the Playboy Club for, was it Gencon 10 or Gencon 11?
Gencon 10. So Gencon 11 was my first.
Okay.
But Gencon 10 was the last one that I didn't go to.
Okay. So you've been to every one since then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He comes back. He brings you the Holmes basic D&D, which the Holmes box has got that really cool, I don't know what style of art, but it's got kind of a cool picture of a dragon on it, sitting on top of a dragon horde.
Dave Sutherland did that art.
Yeah, it's great. Great piece of art. Most people think of, the Moldvay or Mincer for basic D&D, but Holmes was actually the first. And everything else, a lot of stuff is built off of that. Now, of course, you had OD&D, but then you had, the Holmes basic. Now, did your copy, did it have dice or did it have the chits?
Dice.
It had the dice. Okay. Because I keep hearing about these legendary chits.
The chits came out in later editions.
Oh, okay. I thought they were the first editions because they didn't have the dice then. So did they run out of dice? Did the supply run out for the later editions?
The story is there was a dice shortage because of the petroleum issues in the late 70s.
Oh, okay.
They inserted chits instead.
And that was your randomizer at that time.
Right.
Okay. You got the Holmes basic and like you, I'm a huge Tolkien fan. And to me, now, D&D and tabletop role-playing are constantly changing, and new players are bringing different ideas and new creators, and the idea of what fantasy role-playing is keeps changing. But to me, based on when I grew up and the times I was in and the things I love, to me, D&D is basically Tolkien epic high fantasy. That's what I like when I play. And so... I love it when, that's like you have a party with all the, the basic archetypes in it and you're dungeon crawling or you're fighting the big dark master or whatever. I don't mind evil being evil and good being good and all that stuff.
I agree with you, Shane.
Yeah. So, and some of the new stuff is fine. Like I said, I'm not against it. It's just, I have no problem with kicking down the doors. Those goblins are evil. So have you always... It sounds like you've always maintained that love of sort of Tolkien.
Absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, when I played in a continuous campaign for almost 38 years with my best friend and best man at my wedding, and we started playing D&D. It was 1980 when we started the campaign, and in first edition AD&D, and for the one time my character was going to get psionics. And at the moment I was about to get energy control, he suggested that we switch over to Rollmaster, which, of course, the system for Middle-earth role-playing.
Sure.
And I said, this wouldn't have anything to do with the fact that I'm about to get energy control, would it? And he said, oh, no. Of course, 35 years later, he admitted to me that was wholly the reason, because it was too balancing.
Yeah.
But we played the rest of the campaign in Rollmaster, and we finished up at Gencon in 2015. So the campaign did run for 35 years.
How amazing is that? I mean, I've played a lot of role-playings in D&D, but I've never been in a campaign that ran that long. I'd ask, so as a campaign goes that long, what does it become about over time? Is it still high adventure, let's go kill the bad guys, or does it become more...
Oh, it was. Mark Greenberg is a fantastic dungeon master, and he always kept it relevant and fun for us. One of the reasons, I mean, of course, political stuff started creeping in, and we founded a kingdom, and we eventually were battling the Dark Lord that came back into the world after being gone for 3,000 years, and all that kind of stuff. And it was an epic battle at the end, and almost everybody died, and it was fantastic. And, But we were still battling bad guys all the time. They just became more and more powerful as time went on.
Right. And that sounds great. I mean, that's how I'd want my campaign to go. It's like, let's just raise heck and kill bad guys till the very end. But I remember, the BECME as a basic expert, companion, master, and I guess immortal rule. Yep. They kind of took you on an arc where you basically, it's like you've been played so long and you're so high level, you're just going to become almost, like divine and have like almost, what's the word I'm looking for? Mythic. Yeah, there's another word I'm looking for, but mythic is a great way to put it, where, you're almost on different planes of existence, and, you've become immortal. You're almost like a concept rather than a person, and, all that kind of stuff. So
our campaign did not do that. We were still, I mean, my character at the end was probably the equivalent of like Gilgalad from the Second Age, really powerful,
right?
But didn't have any extra planar component to it. So we ended up battling really powerful demons who were coming into the world because the Dark Lord had returned, that kind of a thing. So
I got you. All right. So metaphysical, that's the word I was looking for. So okay. Mythical/metaphysical. So you switched to Rollmaster, which, as you said, was Middle-earth role-playing, is almost Rollmaster light in a way, kind of a scaled-down version of Rollmaster. And my last podcast that I had, which was the developer of a computer RPG called Scald, it just so happened to come up that our favorite fumble in the history of role-playing games was from MERP. Do you remember that great fumble in Rollmaster or MERP?
Well, I remember a lot of criticals from Rollmaster and MERP. The tiny critical, that a small creature can do, where it says a bizarre attack strikes you in the eyes, and you take a deep critical. So the fumbles and the criticals are legendary in Rollmaster.
They're amazing. Do you remember the one involving a turtle?
Not offhand.
Okay. No. It was you stumble over a long dead, imaginary, unseen turtle, and you're stunned for 3 rounds because you're confused. So it's the best. So, but yeah, Rollmaster was a big one. That was Iron Crown Enterprises. They did MERP. There's evidently an OSR retro clone of MERP out there called Against the Dark Master that I just heard of. So I was going to go check that out. Now, do you still play any? Are you actively playing? I mean, I know it sounds like your campaign just ended. Are you playing any systems?
Mark started a 5e campaign after the long running campaign came to an end. So yes, we are playing, and I've started running a game for my 12 and 9-year-old.
Fun.
And I decided I still love my 1E, but I realized that any of their friends would be playing 5E, so I've taught them 1E and 5E. So I'm running a 5E campaign for them and their friends.
That's great. Yeah, I have a weekly 5E campaign that I run, and then at conventions and on, like if they have game days or something, I'll do one-shots of other stuff. And every now and then, in between longer campaigns, I ran like Keep on the Borderlands in Basic, and for a couple of months just for the fun of it. I love these. Goodman Games is putting out these classic adventures like Reincarnated or whatever. Have you seen these?
That's what I'm running for my kids. I'm running the Keep on the Borderlands for my kids.
Are those not fantastic? Those, I mean, because you get reprints. of the original version, and then you get conversions to 5e, and then you get articles and stuff about like the history of the modules. There's some of my favorite things being produced right now, and I just picked up the Expedition of the Barrier Peaks one. They're really good products.
For about a year or so, I had the entire Caves of Chaos laid out in Dwarven Forge on my basement floor.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I'll try to send you some pictures of that.
So, if you light 4 candles and chant, I think there's some poem, if you chant it backwards, Stefan Pokorny will appear. So, and which may or may not be a good thing, depending on, what you're wanting to happen at that very moment. So,
I'm hoping Stefan will stop off at my house in March for GaryCon this year and see the 3-level town I have.
To have it set up. He goes to North Texas and those cons too. He's such a fun guy. Yep. So he's just
very good. He DMs my kids at the conventions, and it's great.
Yeah, I have yet to be able to get into one of his theatrical D&D sessions, but I've seen pictures and video, and they're amazing. So
they're a lot of fun.
Yeah, he's doing a lot of cool stuff with that Dwarven Forge. So I saw, I don't know if it was, I can't remember which social media it was on, but there's pictures where somebody built out the whole dungeon in Dwarven Forge. And Dwarven Forge, for people who don't know, are really high quality 3D pieces of dungeons and towns that are modular, and you can build stuff. So you could build your whole dungeon, or you could build a town, or you can, do whatever you want. And it's very, there's all kinds of stuff. There's magic portals, and there's skulls, and there's this and all this stuff. But I saw somebody, they built out an entire dungeon in Dwarven Forge on a game-sized table, if you know what I mean. And then they covered it with like black paper as a fog of war. And as the party made it further and further into the dungeon, then the DM would remove like one small piece.
Right, that's how you do it.
Yeah,
you put a tarp over it and then remove as sections as needed.
Yeah, and it looked fair. It was just, I was like, that is so cool. Really neat stuff. All right, anyway, so you're playing 5e. You love 1e. I like 1e as well. I like pretty much all D&D. Now, the basic expert rules and first edition have a huge special place in my heart because that's what I played at the beginning, right? And there's, so they have a huge nostalgia, and there's a simplicity and a straightforwardness to those that I like a lot as far as the tone. And I have no problem with classes and, you have to roll a certain thing to be that class, because it's, it's okay for certain things to be hard to get and special and that kind of thing. But they have a special place in my heart because of, the time that I played them in. But I like 5th edition fine. I like 3rd fine. Now, I've never played 4th, not because I know a lot of people don't like 4th edition, but that was a time in my life where I wasn't playing. That was probably the only time in my life where I wasn't actively playing tabletop role-playing games. So, I wouldn't be opposed to playing it sometime to check it out. I'm going to guess you might be the same way, seeing as how is your collection. I'm very system promiscuous. I'll buy a role-playing game just because I want to see how the mechanics work.
Well, I would buy a role-playing game because I felt the compulsive urge to have one of everything on my shelves. But people will ask me because, of course, anything that came out in shrink wrap, I have in shrink wrap. But I could always buy a second one if I wanted to actually play the system. I just didn't play my primary copy. But in terms of playing, I actually went from 1E to 5E. I never played 3 or 4 because I loved my 1E, and I was perfectly happy to play my 1E. I mean, I've played other things, too. I've played RuneQuest. I've played Tunnels and Trolls. I mentioned, obviously, Rollmaster. I've played a whole bunch of systems. But in terms of D&D, I liked 1E so much I didn't have a specific reason to play any of the intermediate editions. Yeah, and there's,
again, what I'm about to say is subjective. Everybody has their own preference.
Absolutely.
I don't mind a game being a little bit hard to learn. To me, it's kind of like the exoticness, I've got to figure out how the system works. Boy, these dice are weird. how do I figure out armor class? To me, that was part of the attraction of D&D. You know, it was like me and my friends that were learning secret things that the Muggles didn't know or something, right? I mean, not that I didn't want the Muggles to play, but it didn't have to be super easy and accessible for me, right?
Sure.
And
you found you had an in into the club. I understand.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that was part of the attraction to me. Now, 5e is much streamlined and much more simple, and it's very fun. It's not rules light. They've just streamlined things and it's fun, but I have no problem at all, going into like 1E and trying to figure stuff out. To me, that's like, so it's part of the fun, and for a long time, D&D attracted the sort of mathematical engineering type people. It almost self-selected them in a way. Whereas today it's a much broader range. It's gone super, super mainstream these days. So but anyway, that's a big, huge tangent. I want to talk about another game that is big for you. And it also has a tie-in to tabletop role-playing games. More than one historian, including, if I'm remembering correctly, John Peterson.
Yes, he referenced it in Playing at the World.
Yeah, Playing at the World, that, anybody who's interested at all in the history of role-playing games or gaming in general needs to get Playing at the World by John Peterson. And I want to mention, before I forget, in the Art and Arcana, the history book that's also an art book of D&D that tells the history of D&D through the art of D&D, Bill is specifically called out and mentioned. Because did they not use some of your materials for the book, or tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. John and Michael Whitwer, friends of mine, mentioned that they were doing this product along with Michael's brother and Kyle Newman, and who I don't know well. But they asked for my help, and they spent about 30 hours at my home here scanning and getting images, taking pictures of items from my collection. And they gave me a lovely thank you in the book, which was very kind of them. And they even included a picture of me, which they didn't have to do. It was very nice, standing in front of the wall.
The wall, in caps. Yeah. The wall.
That's how it's become to be known, especially with the Game of Thrones tie-in there.
Yeah.
But, it was very nice of them, and I was happy to help them because I think they did an amazing job, and it will stand as an archival commentary on the art of the D&D game. So I think they did us all a favor and a service, the whole community, by producing that book. So I was very happy to help out.
That is Art and Arcana is amazing. It's and the art of D&D is a huge part of what the game is. The overall. I mean, you could play the same game with just the rules in text, but the art defines a lot of the personality and the tone of the game. And especially in the early days, the art, and again, it's probably just because I'm a grognard, but the art, like in 1E, just engages me in a way that the newer books have amazing visual design. They're beautiful. They have amazing art. And I mean, it is art. It's great, but there's something about the whimsical nature of the earlier books that engages me in a different way. There's, I don't know, like you on one page, you'll get this, there's a paladin fighting demons. And on the next page, there's like a little comic strip of like, well, it's either a +1 back scratcher or a wand of, Bigsby's grasping hand or whatever. And so I just love all that old art.
It goes without saying that I love it too.
Yeah.
I'm stuck in my 1E world and happy to be there. So
yeah. There's just, in the art, but as you look through Art and Arcana, the book that, as you mentioned, Michael Whitwer, Kyle Newman, John Peterson, Sam Whitwer. A lot of people don't know, Sam Whitwer, Michael Whitwer's brother, he's an actor, but he's also a legit tabletop RPG gamer. Like, he's really into tabletop RPG games. So I haven't confirmed it myself, but I hear he's actually a pretty big fan of Castles and Crusades. So anyway, moving on. You've got all this stuff in your house that's role-playing games. We will continue talking about that, but I want I want to diverge. What I was saying is that a lot of historians, including John Peterson, have talked about Strat-O-Matic Baseball and the Strat-O-Matic sports games, I guess, as important elements that help lead to the tabletop role-playing. One of the elements, a huge element, of course, being tabletop war games. But another element that doesn't get discussed as often is the statistical mechanics and game engine of the Strat-O-Matic Baseball. And you not only are aware of this game, but are a multi-time champion of Strat-O-Matic Baseball. So would you mind telling us a little bit about that?
My mom brought home Strat-O-Matic for me in the spring of 1974, just when D&D was being released, ironically. And I was 8 years old and loved it, started playing with it. My father had just recently passed away, and he was a big baseball fan. So this gave me a way to dive into something that he loved. And so I started playing it and exhaustively studying baseball statistics and things. And then my other brother-in-law, stopped by with his cards back from 1962, which was the first full season of Strat-O-Matic Baseball. So then I was introduced at 8 to Mickey Mantle and Sandy Koufax and Willie Mays and Hank Aaron. And it just augmented that interest in baseball history. So I started playing Strat-O-Matic with all my friends, and we would play 162 games in a week. We'd play 23 games a day. We'd play 27 games a day at about 20 minutes a game, and then do all the stats on the seventh day, and then start it again the next week. So we played thousands of games of Strato. And then they started having national conventions and tournaments in the mid-1980s. And I won the first national championship. I've won 2 others since then. I don't actively play in the tournaments anymore. Being a father has had me decide to...
it changes things, doesn't it?
Sure. My role-playing stuff has continued unabated, but I let the Strato go to the side. So... but they still hold national, regional conventions, and then a national tournament, usually in Las Vegas in January. So, but it uses a 3d6 to generate the results on the player's cards. It's all statistical driven, as you were saying. It's not like fantasy baseball where you get points for somebody doing something. Here, you're actually recreating the seasons of the actual baseball season. So the cards are based upon the player's statistical performance. And it uses 3d6 to generate the results, but then within the results, sometimes you have to roll a 20-sided die to get a differential. So it will say home run 1 to 14, double on a 15 through 20. And so that breakdown and specificity of results is what is so interesting about the game. It can be so precise to replicate how the players performed in real life. And so they were using that breakdown when in war games, there were not, it was all just still 6-sided dice. I think that's one of the, larger mathematical components to it. It's precision. So
do you agree that, it actively contributed to the DNA of, tabletop role playing?
Well, I would certainly bow to John Peterson's feelings in this regard because he knows more about that even than I do.
Right.
He's written the definitive tome.
He really has.
Playing world, but he referenced it. So until I read the book, I did not really think about the connection between that and RPGs or historical games and then RPGs. But I'm sure it played a role. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm just wondering I believe there is a connection. I'm just wondering, if anyone ever got, Gygax or somebody on record, saying, and it might be in John's book, it's a huge book and I'd need to go back and reference, but it's come up there. It's come up in articles that I've read online. And then I was privileged to be the co-author on the second edition of Dungeons and Desktops, the history of computer role-playing games with Matt Barton. And the first edition already had a reference to Strat-O-Matic as part of the DNA of tabletop role-playing games, which of course led, hugely to computer role-playing games. And that, I believe that was published, the first edition, before Playing at the World. So, evidently it's an accepted thought. So And it helped me understand, because I've never played Strat-O-Matic.
Sure.
So you get these cards. Are they almost like character sheets for each player?
Well, they will list individual things like their stealing ability, running ability, their defense, bunting, hit and run abilities. And then the cards themselves, on the basic side, it's divided into 1, 2, and 3 column. And the pitcher's card has a 4, 5, and 6. So it's the batter-pitcher matchup. You roll a 6-sided die to see which card you look on. And then you take 2 other dice, add them together, and get a result between 2 and 12. And that gives you the individual result, which can be strikeout, ground ball, that some ground balls will be double play ground balls, some ground balls will be force outs. There are results where you have to test a fielder to see if they make the play or not. On the advanced side, you have it broken down to against left-handed pitching and right-handed pitching, and then there are ballpark effects in the advanced game. So it's a recreation. You're able to recreate games and full seasons of the players, and it's all based upon their real-life statistics.
Okay, and like you said, it's not... like fantasy football or fantasy baseball or whatever takes whatever happened in real games and uses those results to generate the fantasy football or baseball results.
So if you pick, you add up, yes,
right. So if you pick a player,
it bears no connection to rotisserie baseball or fantasy baseball. Although, of course, obviously, a lot of the people who play Strat-O-Matic baseball, and there's also Strat-O-Matic football, basketball, hockey, they also do fantasy sports games as well. So
right. But there's
no essential connection between the two.
Yeah, because in this you actually have a card that has statistics for that player, and then you're generating through a randomizer, in this case dice, what they did or didn't do based on their statistics, based on their attributes, if you will.
Right.
And then you can play. You can generate an entire season of a game that you love. So I could definitely see elements of tabletop role playing game in there.
And one of the big things that they did was they started making past seasons. So in right now you can buy the 1957 season if you want to. You can buy the 1954 season and replay the 1954 season if 1957. If you're a Milwaukee Braves fan and you want to recreate the year they won the championship, you can go back and do that. So that was a really great move, smart move on their part to do that. So it brought the history into it as well. If you want to go back and see how Ty Cobb would do in 1911, you could go back and replay the Detroit Tigers schedule for 1911 and see, how he would do with you managing him. So
is it compatible enough that I could take somebody from 1940 and put them on the same team with somebody from today?
Well, that's the idea, of course, because they have ballpark effects. And so, yes, a lot of people, what they'll do all-star leagues. Okay. So my lineup might have Frank Thomas from 1994 and then Ted Williams from 1941 playing left field. So a lot of people do that, yes.
That sounds fun. So now the pictures I've seen, what attracts me to Strat-O-Matics is the actual physical components. You've got all these wonderful cards and little mechanical devices and this, that, and the other. And that's very attractive to me. But are most people doing it by computer these days, or is there still a heavy? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they computerized it in I think the early 90s and late 80s, and a lot of people do, of course, play on the computer. Absolutely.
Sure.
When they run the individual tournaments, we still use dice to get our results there. But most people use the computer. Absolutely.
All right. So do you have? Do you still personally have like those wonderful older components and games from your youth? Yeah.
Yeah, I have near complete sets of the cards from 1962 to now.
Oh wow.
I think there are 1 or 2 seasons I don't have from the mid to late 60s, but I have all the rest of the cards.
So do you have a favorite player that player always goes on your teams, your fantasy teams?
Well, you see, one of the things about the individual tournaments is it wouldn't be fair if you could pick a team. You pick individual players. So you roll 20-sided die, and whoever gets the high roll gets to pick first, and then the draft will serpentine back around. So you'll be picking at the first pick in the first round, but the last pick in the second round, and then the first pick in the third round, and the last pick in the fourth round. So you pick individual players at the tournaments.
Okay.
So I guess what I'm saying is you can't just automatically say I want so and so and get that person.
Right.
It's a function of everybody else picking as well. But so I mean, of course, I had favorite players growing up. Hank Aaron. I remember when he hit his 715th homer. I was an 8-year-old at the moment. I just had gotten my Strat-O-Matic cards actually when he broke Babe Ruth's home run record. You know, I'm always partial to picking Hank Aaron if I'm playing an old timers league as an example. So.
All right. Well, that sounds really neat. And like you said, it sounds like the scene is still active. Like
yes.
Yeah. Okay. And you said you've won the national championship 3 different times.
Yes, with the 1986 cards, the 1991 cards, and then the 1996 cards.
Fun. And so there's people out there that speak of you in hushed tones and fear your return.
Well, hopefully not hushed. Hopefully, I'll get back to playing again after my kids are a little older.
Right. So are either one of your kids showing an interest in baseball?
A little bit. They both have played, but they really love the fantasy role-playing stuff.
Right.
And I've been taking them to conventions since they were born, game conventions, Gencon. So they really like that a lot. It would have broken my heart if they weren't gamers. So
right.
I have. That's one of the reasons I started getting the Dwarven Forge stuff, because I never actually used components like that when we were playing with Mark. Mm-hmm. We would just use dice to represent our figures.
Yeah.
But when Dwarven Forge came up with their new formula and did their Kickstarters with their new Dwarvenite, and they're indestructible now, and I realized my children could not break any of these expensive things, I decided to go heavily into Dwarven Forge. And so I think the 3-dimensional component in the area of video games was important to get them to understand what was actually happening on the tabletop, because I started them very young. I mean, they were gaming when they were 5.
Right.
So they understood that we were moving through the dungeon because of the, being able to have the 3-dimensional component. And so I think that was a good idea on my part, so that they would start doing this at a young age, and it became part of their DNA that we play fantasy role-playing games.
That's really great. I'm doing a little bit with my son. I've got the No Thank You Evil from Monty Cook Games, but it's very accessible for kids, and it doesn't limit, because kids are just exploding with imagination, right? And No Thank You Evil, I guess, is kind of designed to use that instead of hindering it. Like, oh no, you can only be this. It's like, no, it adapts to the kid's imagination. But yeah, I'm gonna start playing some basic D&D with him before too long. And then, have you met Carl Heil at North Texas by any chance?
Yes, in passing.
Okay, he runs a really, really good kids table, and I think he usually uses Swords and Wizardry Light, but he runs a really good kids table, and I'm going to start getting my son into his kids table at local conventions. And I've watched Carl with these kids, and it's so much fun. The kids will just blow you away with the imagination they come up with.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I was watching Carl run some kids. One of their ideas was they fed a centipede to a mimic to try to make the mimic sick. Things like that. Just wonderful stuff like that. So
that's great.
Yeah. So yeah, just really good stuff. All right. So Strat-O-Matic Baseball. It just fascinates me to see all this stuff come together. You have what the Dave Arneson's group was doing with Brownstein Gaming and all that. Then you've got, of course, Blackmore. You got Strat-O-Matic. You got all this stuff coming together in a perfect storm, and then just exploding into tabletop role playing, which is just amazing. I'm from the school. I think that Gary Gygax is vitally important to tabletop role playing in Dungeons and Dragons, and I also think that Dave Arneson is very important. There seem to be these camps that, it's Gary or Dave, and I'm like, well, it's chocolate and peanut butter. Mm-hmm. They came together and created this beautiful thing, and then Gary Gygax with that business sense, got it out there. So that's kind of how I look at it.
They were both vital to the game
Right.
being available for us to be 40 million of us to be able to be playing today.
Exactly. And I honor them both in the history of the hobby. All right, everybody, this is a good place for a break. Don't worry, we'll be back with Bill and his collecting and more of the cool RPG topics we're covering very soon. We'll throw out some quick show notes, and then we'll get to our sponsors. But if you ever want to reach me, you can reach me at Shane Plays on Twitter. That's ShanePlays. You could also contact me via the blog at shaneplays.com. The podcast is out there from last week, and that's episode 205, James M. Ward, the Starship Warden and Metamorphosis Alpha, which is also another great show that kind of covers the history of tabletop role-playing games. And if you're listening by podcast or Krypton Radio or one of the other ways that the show goes out after the radio broadcast, the show notes for today's show are up at shaneplays.com. Speaking of the podcast, we do go out as a podcast on the blog, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Podbean, SoundCloud, YouTube, and more. And last but never least, Shane Plays is carried on Krypton Radio. Krypton Radio is SciFi for your Wi-Fi. KryptonRadio.com. Okay, we're going to get to some sponsors. We'll be back very soon with more with Bill Meinhardt and his world-class fantasy tabletop RPG collecting.
Comic book lovers, visit thewildstars.com today. From the mind of author and comic book industry expert Michael Tierney, it's not just a comic book, it's a comic book novel. The Wild Stars is sci-fi and so much more. Learn the explanations behind UFOs and space gods. This isn't the Twilight Zone. This is the region of the Milky Way galaxy known as the Wild Stars. We guarantee you've never read anything like it. The complete comic book novel took 20 years to tell, with one reviewer noting, the story of the Wild Stars stretches ambitiously across space and time, from small-town murders to the destruction of planets, with every event given multiple layers of meaning. If you haven't read The Wild Stars, you're missing out. Visit thewildstars.com today.
Are you a fan of thrilling adventure, daring suspense, and just a touch of romance? Cursova has you covered. Since 2016, Cursova has been publishing the very best in contemporary fantasy and science fiction, retro pulp, and for you D&D gamers, Appendix N style fiction. Based in Little Rock, you can pick up their flagship magazine locally or at Michael Tierney's The Comic Book Store on Treasure Hill Road or Collector's Edition on JFK in North Little Rock. Swing by one of Michael's stores and pick up an issue or find them on Amazon. C-I-R-S-O-V-A. Doesn't start with a K, it starts with a C. C-I-R-S-O-V-A, Cursova Magazine. Check them out today. I want to go ahead and throw out some love to Game Goblins. Some goblins are your friends. Game Goblins is Central Arkansas's premier retailer of Magic the Gathering, Warhammer 40K, board games, card games, RPGs, miniatures, and hobby accessories. Call Game Goblins at 501-224-GAME or visit them online at GameGoblins.com. That's 501-224-GAME or GameGoblins.com. Conveniently located 1121 South Bowman, right on the corner of Bowman and Canis in West Little Rock, and staffed by friendly employees, Game Goblins has expanded their store size, and there is plenty of room for exciting inventory and tables for play space. You'll like that space because Game Goblins has gaming events every day of the week. For all of your gaming needs, I heartily recommend Game Goblins. Make sure to check out their customer loyalty program that rewards you based on your actual purchases. Game Goblins earns your business and keeps it. First-time customers, mention Shane Plays and receive $10 off your purchase of $50 or more. Tell them Shane Plays sent you. And folks, if you do visit any of my sponsors, please tell them that you hear about them on the show. That helps them know that their advertising money and the relationship we've built is time and money well spent.
Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/Shane Plays.
Shane Stacks on the radio.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
Hey, welcome back to Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. We now resume our discussion with William Meinhardt, who has the largest collection of fantasy tabletop RPG stuff in the world. Back to the interview. So taking it back to tabletop role-playing games, you have the collection. You said you have 13,000 items. You've got the printout in your binder to prove it. So describe to me if somebody walks into your home, how do you store this? Like what does this all look like?
Well, for the longest time, I had them in legal boxes, and my wife and I came to let her uncle into this house. It was his house, and there was a blank wall that was 30 feet long and 10 feet high. And my wife and I both looked at it and thought, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. And we were able to buy this house from her uncle because he didn't have a use for it anymore. And we did put in floor-to-ceiling bookshelves there. And I was able to get the stuff out of my hundreds and hundreds of legal boxes and up onto the shelves, which had been my goal. So everything is organized on those shelves the same way it's organized in my binder. It's alphabetical by company and then by stock code. And then if there's not a stock code, then it's afterwards alphabetically by the item. So everything is in an exact order on those shelves. The collection used to fit on that wall and then the opposite wall, but it's now literally spread to every room of the house, upstairs. Nothing's in the basement, but I mean, there are things in the basement, but not part of the collection in the basement. But it does fill every room of my house, but they're all up on shelves in bags, boarded and whatnot. So it's but when you walk in the front door, immediately to the left is the wall, and so it's people like, of course, just perusing it and seeing it. Everything is spine out. I've bought some things lately to make it so that more display things, so that I can put things front facing, so people can see a lot more of the rare items. But for 10 years, it's all been spine out because I haven't had the room to make it displayed differently than that. Now,
your wife. How much of a trooper is your wife, man?
My friends refer to my wife Susan as a unicorn because she is unique. So she allows our home to be taken over for my FRP collection.
Well, I mean that's love right there, man. So yes. And that's great. My wife, love her to death. She's I couldn't be without her. I would say. At best, she's baffled and bemused by my tabletop role-playing hobby. So, she doesn't, like, if I tried to bring in an entire wall, convert half our wall or half our house into a wall of tabletop RPGs, there would be lots of interesting discussions, I think. So, hold on. Yeah, treat your unicorn well.
Well, Susan and I met in 2004, so she was aware of what I had, and so no secrets. So
all right.
she's fully on board with this plan, and she will make things display shadow boxes of things to display down in the basement, for instance. So hang them up on. Great. She's active in the collecting part.
You're not doing it to flip. You're not doing it, to have a dragon's hoard. Like you're literally trying to preserve for future generations. And it's important because we're seeing now the ridiculously massive, huge impact that D&D and tabletop role-playing have had on various aspects of our culture.
Sure.
Huge impact.
At a glance, I don't see why RPGs shouldn't command a more important place in our collective hearts than comic books do. With comic books, you read it, but with role-playing games, you can actually interact with what you've read. So right. I think the cultural cachet in that sense is only going to increase over time. People will ask me, where do you, they'll see the rise in prices of RPG collectibles and say, where's this going? I think it's going nowhere but up because people are hitting middle age and they remembered fondly the games of their youth, and now they have the disposable income to try to acquire some of these things.
Right.
So I don't know that a brown box is ever going to go for what a Superman #1 goes for, but I don't see at a glance why they shouldn't. I think 40 million people play D&D now.
Right.
So It's astonishing what they've done with 5e. So as
5e has, and it is a good system. Don't get me wrong. I think it's one of the better systems that D&D has put out. It's streamlined. It's fun to play, but it's got options and tactics. And I think that 5e was very important in the current rise. But I think there was also just a storm coming along of a rising tide, raises all boats. And 5e contributed, but I think there was just, all this different stuff coming along and just raising the visibility. I think that this is something I think about a lot. I think that Kevin Smith is very important to mainstreaming geek culture, which in turn had an adjacent effect on helping to mainstream role-playing games, because that's an important part of geek culture. So if you suddenly make comic books cool, then, if you put the Venn diagram of geek interest, a lot of people who are into comic books overlap with D&D or role-playing games. Sure. And then you suddenly started having all these TV shows. You had The Big Bang Theory, suddenly mainstreaming geek culture and making stuff cool and showing role-playing games. Then you had other, like Community, had a couple of D&D episodes. And then you had companies like Wizards of the Coast, like Paizo, like, other, we could mention other, there's plenty of fantastic companies out there. And then you had the OSR movement come along to tap into the nostalgia and get other people back in. And it just all came together. And it didn't hurt that all these companies were putting out really good products. That's just one of my personal soapboxes I like to get up on, is just all this wonderful stuff came together. And he's not solely responsible, but I give Kevin Smith a lot of credit for making geek stuff cool in the mainstream.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my personal thing. I think about that stuff all the time, which just shows you, how brain damaged I am. All right. In your collection, define, because you want to collect one copy of every fantasy role-playing game product, correct?
Printed in English on paper, pen and paper item. That was published from the start of D&D, which was January of 74, specifically through the end of December of 2003, because that was the first 30 years of fantasy role-playing. Now, it goes without saying that I will collect things after 2003 date as well. But I originally put my the great book by Lawrence Schick, Heroic Worlds, came out in the fall of 1990. And it was an attempt to be an encyclopedic tome for all role-playing items that had come out up through that date. And it was a template for me as a collector to try to go and get a bunch of these things. So I was originally trying to get everything that was in Heroic Worlds. Then I decided to move the collection date, the date up to the end of 1993, the first 20 years. Then I went to 1998. Then I went to the end of the millennium. I finally settled on December 31, 2003. So I'm trying to get one of everything from the first 30 years of the hobby. So I've done a pretty good job. There are a couple hundred things I don't have, and I'm still looking for them. In Heroic Worlds, there are about 40 things I think I don't have that were listed in Heroic Worlds that came out in August of 1990. And my wife, of course, is happy that I limited it theoretically to the end of 2003 because our house is pretty filled up with stuff. But I have all the 5e things, for instance, and I have other full lines of things that have come out since that time. I love Call of Cthulhu as an example, so I have a big Call of Cthulhu collection. But I'm not trying to get one of everything from after 2003. So somebody else can do the next 30 years. I'm trying to get the first 30.
Okay, so let's define, and I know this is a slippery slope and it's hard and it will lead to debates, but how do you define fantasy RPG?
Well, that's a great question. Originally, I defined it as anything that was a tech period up through 1494, because that was the Franco-Italian War, the first war where there were handguns. And so the ability to use a handgun to me seemed to be a separating point between what was fantasy and what was, medieval. Eventually, I decided, since there was so little stuff that actually was in the pirate period. I decided to expand that to go up to the French Revolution, because that then encompassed the era of piracy, and the pirate stuff is just kind of cool, frankly. So if it has a tech level up through 1800, I want to have it. But of course, then there, as you say, there's a slippery slope, because other things, Empire of the Petal Throne and Jeroen, and there's magic in Shadowrun. So where there's magic in Torg. Where do you draw the line? So if Lawrence Schick defined it as science fantasy, I have decided to include it as well. So if it's hard science fiction, no. But if it's science fantasy, I've decided to include it in the collection. So
do you have Shadowrun in your collection?
Yes, I do, as an example.
Now, do you have I assume you have GURPS Dungeon Fantasy, but do you have GURPS in general?
I have GURPS, yes, and unless it's something like GURPS Traveler, where that is, of course, hard science
where it's
fiction.
Just obviously, okay.
Because the other GURPS would have rules in it that could be if you could travel. It's like the Doctor Who role-playing game I have, because you can travel back to 1066 in the Doctor Who role-playing game. So if there are time travel rules as a component, I have, because for that reason.
All right, so did any of the World of Darkness make it in?
Well, the Dark Ages versions of the World of Darkness stuff made it in, yes.
Okay.
So I have all that stuff.
Because I knew there was one of their games was Changeling, which was like in the world of fairy. So, I didn't know if that's fantasy, but it's like a different kind of fantasy. It's not like epic high fantasy or something like that. So, all right. So let me ask you this: you said you still have about 40 books. What are the Lawrence Schick book? What was the name of that again?
Worlds.
I need to get a copy of that.
Prometheus Press in 1990. Oh, absolutely. Every D&D collector should have a copy of Heroic Worlds.
Okay, I need to get a copy of that. So you said you have about 40 items there, but about 200 items total. So these roughly 160 items, how do you know that you're missing those? Are you just like scouring the internet, or?
Oh, sure. I have, want lists out with people, and I have alerts on eBay and whatnot if they pop up, so I'm alerted to their presence. So, I knocked off about 15 of them in the last year, I think, of off my want list. So, and I've talked to my other collector friends like Brett Easterbrook in Australia. He has a number of unusual things. So I've culled my list from him as well. And Mark Petrick up in Toronto, another collector of obscure RPGs, and my other friends, Jeff Imrie. I mentioned Mark Greenberg. John Peterson, of course, has a number of unusual things. It goes without saying. So, and the John has been very helpful to me. He's found things for me, as has Brett down in Australia. He's sent things my way. So, and then I send things his way too. So, we're a very friendly collector community.
So there was I think it was last year, where they did the big exhibit at Gencon, I think the 50th anniversary of Gencon. And there was basically John and other folks set up basically a museum.
Yeah, it was John, Paul Stormberg, myself, and the father of a poor man, head of WotC, and Wizards of the Coast. Why am I trying to blank on one of the most?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about, and I'm blanking. Every time Wizards of the Coast comes up, I try to think of Richard Garfield, but he's not. All he did was create magic. So, but I always try to think of him as the Gary Gygax of Wizards of the Coast, but he's not. So anyway, I'll try to make a footnote.
Peter Atkinson. I don't know why I was trying to blank on Peter. Peter's father brought his magic collection. Yeah. So it was the four of us who set up the museum for Gencon 50, and it was great. It was an honor to be asked. John asked me to do it, and I brought all of my near mint brown box, the one that's in the OD&D video, and a mint condition chainmail, and other early things from the hobby like that. I brought those to the museum.
All right. So what is, if you had to pick, and I know these are your babies, man, but if you had to pick, what is the current crown jewel of your collection that you're just like, either for nostalgia or like, I can't believe I found it, or just for whatever.
People ask me that question, and I really couldn't limit it to one because I have a number of artifacts of the hobby. So, but a short list, certainly that brown box, that's the nicest brown box that we know of. I have the original map to the Judges Guild City-State Invincible Overlord up on my wall. Nice. That's really cool. It's so early on, it doesn't even mention the city-state. It says No Name City in Middle-earth on it in the lower right-hand corner. Because
in Middle-earth.
Yes, in Middle-earth, because he was running his campaign. It was west of the Misty Mountains, and there was this city-state there, and that was where he had it set. And then, of course, ultimately it led to they creating their own world and calling it the City-State Invincible Overlord. So that's really cool. I have Rob Kuntz's Bottle City map from 1974, which there might be an earlier D&D dungeon out there, but this is perhaps the earliest one that we know of that still exists. I mean, there might be another one, but publicly known, there's not. So that's really cool. So I have. I have a number of early artifacts. The 3x5 playing cards that they were using, that Rob and Gary were using to go through the city of Greyhawk, and when they would encounter an NPC, they would write it down on a 3x5 index card and make notes of it as they traveled through the city. I have those index cards. That's really cool.
Wow.
So I've got a number of things like that. I have a set of Domesday books other than number 9. Those were first reference to Blackmore came out, and the first reference to Chainmail when they were, sort of pre-releasing it. So it would be hard to pick one. And I still have my original DMG and Player's Handbook from the late 70s that are near and dear to my heart. So,
well, and those I can't remember on the spine. I think they started with a lizard man and switched to a wizard. So you probably got the original lizard man stuff, right?
Are you referring to the DMG never had a lizard man on?
Did it not? Okay.
No. But I of course have lots of things with lizards. I have lots of little lizard men running around in my house.
It's fascinating when you get a real historian starts digging in, like yourself or John, or not only was like the lizard man first, but there's multiple versions of the lizard man. And then I guess they switched over to the wizard. So there's just all this wonderful minutia, tracking the history of these products, which, for a lot of the people involved in making them, they were just a commercial product, but, they've gone on to become, artifacts of very, very, very important pop culture archaeology and cultural archaeology. So, again, I commend you and the others for collecting these for preservation.
Well, it's been fun too. It hasn't. Yeah. I mean, it's been a labor of love as far as that goes.
Well, there's people out there that, like, I have a local game store owner he's a comic book shop owner actually, but he started buying and selling old games. And when I go into a game store, I always look around like, do you have a shelf of, old stuff, used stuff? Because that's what I like to look through first. But this guy started getting a lot of stuff in, and he will set stuff aside for me to look at first before anybody else. And then also will sometimes give me a really good deal on something because he knows I'm not going to flip them.
Sure.
And there's people out there that respect that, so some stuff he just buys to sell, but there's some stuff he knows is special that he'll set aside. And I've also recently gotten from him like a pretty good run of the old, I collect. Now I'll back up a little bit and kind of share my interest in this collecting thing. I started collecting a few years ago, just games that I remembered fondly, or games that I wanted because I knew they were important to the history. Several years ago, I started becoming sort of an armchair historian of RPGs and all that. And so I started collecting, and I'm starting to see more and more, like if I go to a comic book convention, there'll be a couple of vendors that also have boxes full of old RPGs. Mm-hmm. So like you said, it's starting to become more of a thing. And then I didn't find out till just the last couple of years how big the scene really is. Now it's the really serious collectors are concentrated in a few individuals, but I had no idea that people like you were out there until just within the past couple of years.
Well, if I may interject for just a second, that was
Sure.
one of the reasons I was happy to do the video with John.
Right.
Is that I realized that I wasn't trying to do something in secret, but I also wasn't trying to stand up on the table and bang my chest and say, look at what I have. But I realized I should probably raise my profile to a degree so people realize that there were people out there who were meticulously trying to preserve the history of the hobby. So people would understand that that the stuff actually still does exist from those early days. So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, that's a perfect addition to, what I'm trying to say is that there's this is a good time to get into collecting because any collecting hobby, eventually the speculators will come along, and that might be happening a little bit, but it's still genuine and organic enough that you can find stuff you really want, beloved stuff, and there's a camaraderie and a community, and it hasn't turned into a big collectors, speculators thing yet. So do you have any tips if somebody is either interested in collecting or is just starting? Do you have any tips that you would give them?
Funny thing is that when Lawrence Schick, he interviewed me for about 4 hours before at Gencon before he published that book, Heroic Worlds, and I was excited because I was 24. And I thought he'd give me a mention in his book, and I had told him I'm trying to get one of everything, and so the book came out, and I got a copy of it. And not only was I not mentioned in the thank yous, but he specifically said, he said, limit yourself. Don't try to set a goal like one of every science fiction game, because you'll soon be swamped and not getting any closer to to the holy grail of finishing something off. So I read it, and not only did he not mention me, but he dissed me.
Oh no!
So then I ran into him eventually at North Texas in 2014, and I relayed the story as we were all sitting around a table together. And he apologized. I wasn't looking for an apology, but then he finally signed my copy of Heroic Worlds, and he put in it to Bill Meinhardt, who knows a lot more about this stuff than I do.
Oh wow!
So we had a good laugh about it.
Yeah.
The pang of my being dissed, disappeared over 20 years. But anyway, Lawrence's suggestion was a good one. Don't try to get one of everything RPG. Try to get one of everything Champions, or one of everything Shadowrun, or one of everything GURPS, or what have you. And that's big enough that it will take you a while, but small enough that you will actually be able to complete it eventually. But then, yes, use all the resources available. Use eBay, use local stores, go to conventions, use all the things that we've talked about. Paul Meyer, a.k.a. Crazy Igor, was wonderful for me over the years. He would find all sorts of things for me on his want lists. I mean, I would give him my want lists, and he would find them for me. He found my first Lost Tomoa Con for me in 1990 at Gencon. And I went over and I had Harold Johnson sign it in 1990. And, that was they released that at Origins in 1979.
Yeah, that was a tournament module, wasn't it?
Right. They printed 300 copies for sale at the end of the convention, and they now have become, very valuable collector's items. The most recent one sold for $5,400.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's getting into comic book territory there. So, talking about starting to get the cachet. Now, it doesn't have the mind share of comic books yet, in culture, but that value, that's no joke. So, now that, if I remember, I ran that at a guy's bachelor party, actually. I said, what do you want to do for your bachelor party? He said, I want to play D&D. So I bought a PDF copy of that off of Drive-Thru. That's the one that's like Aztec themed, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that was fun. Yeah. And what I like about that module, these tournament modules will score players based on actions they take or do or don't do or whatever. So you could actually objectively, when the session ends, tell the players by the standards of the tournament module how well they did. It's a lot of fun. So do you have any danger signs or red flags if you're dealing with certain people or situations that you've run into to just kind of move along?
I suppose one of the things I would mention is that it has not become endemic yet, but in a certain sense, beware of shrink wrap, because now people are re-shrinking things because the prices for things in shrink wrap have gone up. The advantage of shrink wrap is it tells you that there's no writing inside. Other people specifically think that an item is greatly augmented if it's in its original shrink wrap. But the shrink wrap is not a condition, is one of my mantras. But the advantage of buying something in original shrink wrap over the internet, for instance, is that that the inside pages are clean and unmarked, but you have to be aware that it's actually the original shrink wrap. Mm-hmm. And now, so that's somewhat problematic, because unless you're me or somebody else who has things from that vintage that can compare the shrink wrap, it becomes a little difficult. So buyer beware, I guess, is what I would say.
Right. It's hard don't assume that shrink wrap is necessarily the original shrink wrap.
That's right.
All right. Fair enough. So I'll share a couple of my, 2 or 3 years of collecting. I'll share a couple of my beloved items that I found. And then, I'd like to know what, you're hoping to find, what out of these 200 items, like kind of what your holy grail is. But a couple of the, there's some stuff when you're collecting that you're like, yeah, I'm going to buy that because it helps add to the list of what I'm looking for. But I'm buying that because I'm getting an emotional zing off of it, right? Not only do I want that as part of my list, but I really want that. I'm connecting with that item. I would say one of the things that I found, in fact, I found it at North Texas, and I feel like I got a good deal on it, was an original box set of Dragon Raid with all of the components. Okay. And that to me is important because it's, a lot of people don't know about it, but it's an interesting footnote in fantasy tabletop RPG because it was an attempt by Christian publishers to make a Christian alternative to D&D, because of the moral panic and all that stuff. The good guys get to roll a crystalline D10, and the bad guys have to roll a black D8. That's right. And this is not a religious discussion. I'm just saying from the pop culture archaeology, if you will, of the game, you got your magical power by memorizing Bible verses. So, and it's actually, and it has a little audio cassette with it. And it's actually, I remember playing it. I had a friend, whose mom was like, I don't want you to play D&D, but she would be cool with MERP. And I'm definitely seeking out MERP product. MERP is Middle-earth role-playing is near and dear to my heart. Villains, Vigilantes, those are some of the other Traveler. Those are some of the earlier games I played. But she would let him play MERP and Dragon Raid. So I played Dragon Raid a few times. So it has that nostalgia connection for me as well. And then I found recently in very good condition a copy of Metamorphosis Alpha, the original first edition Metamorphosis Alpha, in very good condition. And I don't have nostalgic memories of playing that, but as a historian and as an RPG collector and lover, it has value to me as the first science fiction RPG that was published. Along with Starfaring by Ken St. Andre, yes. So which one came out first? This was 2 years before I started collecting, okay. So I've heard both. All right. I won't go on record as saying one before the other. Okay, fair enough. Go ahead. Yeah. The first printing of Metamorphosis Alpha, of course, has the F0018 stock code on the front cover. That's how you can tell the first print of Met Alpha. And I was going to say about Dragon Raid, by the way, by Adventure Learning Systems, Inc., that, just so you know, in 1991, they came out with Moonbridge Raid Part 2 and Moonbridge Raid Part 3.
And because there's Moonbridge Rage Part 1 in the box set of Dragon Raid. So you can find Part 2 and Part 3 of that as well that they released.
Oh, neat. I didn't know that they had continued. That's why I love talking with people like yourself. But my personal thing is I like to collect, and sometimes I don't know I want to collect something till I see it. And then I'm like, oh, I definitely want that. But I like to collect either stuff that I played in my formative years that really got into my system, no pun intended, or that I know from research is historically important to tabletop role-playing. So that's sort of my loose definition of what I collect. But, DC Heroes, Marvel RPG, I'll snap all that stuff up because I played it, and I have fond memories. And then also, like, for example, DC Heroes is important to me because it used that wonderful exponential table for its system as a way of saying, how can we have Batman and Superman in the same fight? Because Superman's so way off the charts compared to Batman. So, if it's something that I feel could, or like Ghostbusters, a lot of people consider Ghostbusters from West End Games the first dice pool game. Mm-hmm. So, like, I want Ghostbusters, that kind of thing. So that's kind of my criteria. It still impresses me that you started at 16. You had the foresight at 16 to start collecting all this stuff. But I did want to ask you, do you have any, out of that remaining roughly 200 items, do you have a Holy Grail?
Well, originally I was getting I wanted every published item. And then at a Gencon in 1987, Frank Menser was the lead auctioneer at Gencon for many, many years. And what came up was the tournament that was run for the AD&D Open in 1980, and it was the original Masters. It wasn't even a judge's copy. It was the original Masters that they used to create the judge's copy. So it was handwritten and typed, and there was whiteout, and the maps were all hand-drawn, and it was approved for sale by the TSR legal department, and it was this enormous packet of materials, about an inch thick. And it was what became eventually the A series of modules, but it was run for the AD&D Open at Gen Con in 1980. And Frank put this up for sale, and he's staring at me. I was in about the 10th row, and he was saying, "You're never going to see this again." And he was trying to get me to bid without saying, right. Bill, bid. Yeah. But the bidding went along, and it got to like $140. And there's one person left with his hand up, and I was sitting there with my arms folded because this was not a published item. I wasn't going to go down this road. I had so much stuff as it was, and I was using every last dollar to fund my collection.
Right.
And I was resolute. I was furrowed brow, arms crossed, right. And he said, "We're never going to see this again. This is going to go into somebody's collection. It's never going to come back out. This is your only chance to get it. Going once, going twice." Some other person bid, and the bidding got up to $200, and then the first person dropped out, and it was just the second person left. And Frank again went through the same spiel. "You're never going to see this again. You're missing a bet." And he said, "Going once, going twice." I raised my arm. And he said 210, and the second guy dropped out, and I think his girlfriend was kind of prodding him like, "I can't believe you're going to spend $200 on this thing." Right. And so I won it for $210, and he said, "Well, the person who I thought was going to win this finally decided to bid." And so winning that, and I have to give Frank credit for this, winning that opened up a door to me, because now, I have those 200 things that I'm looking for, but the things that I really get excited about finding now, I still get excited if I find something off my want list, don't misunderstand me. But if I find a convention adventure from 1982, that's really exciting, because these are like, lost treasures that if I don't find them, they might just totally disappear. So I have well over 100 tournament adventures that were run at conventions from the 70s, up through 2003, and I'm really happy to have found those. So that excites me, finding a hidden treasure like that would be just utterly lost otherwise.
I'm glad Frank waggled his eyebrows at you.
Yes,
and he has mighty eyebrows to waggle. So out of those 200 items, mm-hmm. Is there one that you think is going to be the hardest, that like you really will be surprised when you find it? Yeah.
Well, in a similar vein, when Bob Blake did the adventure for Gencon in 1976, he did copies locally there in Valparaiso that he printed up, and that's probably the rarest thing that I'm looking for are the official dungeon of Gencon 9, the private printings that he did of it. And so that he did not do very many. This is from 1976. So that's far and away the rarest thing that I'm looking for off those 200 items are those copies of the official dungeon of Gencon 9.
So with the years that have gone by, I'm imagining like a lot of this stuff, and I'm guessing it shows up on the market because either A, somebody's like, I need money, and they find, like I'm going to go break into that box up in the attic, or unfortunately people are, we're losing people from that generation.
Yeah.
And like, their wife or somebody like, I've got all this stuff, I don't know what it's worth. Is that usually how stuff is showing up on the market these days from that kind of, list?
Sure. A lot of it certainly is that, people will my husband passed away and they'll put stuff on eBay or sell it to a store that then puts it up on eBay. That certainly happens. But there are certainly, you were talking about middlemen, if you will, and there are those in the hobby. They will find these items and then put them up on eBay and make a profit on the sale of it. And I'm very happy about that because otherwise, I wouldn't find many of these things. So, of the 15 things I said I found in the last year, I would say half of them I found on through eBay. So eBay is a really great tool for finding this stuff.
Are you seeing, I noticed that I see more and more kind of eBay-ish type activity showing up on Amazon these days. Are you finding anything on Amazon?
I found a couple of things on Amazon. I mean, you've got to use all the tools available.
Right.
I find things also on Facebook sites. So, yeah, any online searches like that, where you can reach out to the entire globe is a good thing. But I still find things at, stores. If I'm in a different city, I will stop, of course, local stores and see if there's stuff there. So you've got to use all the means available, especially when I'm looking for such a limited amount of things, relatively speaking. So, right. And conventions obviously are a great way because people know to bring things to Gen Con, to Gamehole Con, to North Texas, to Gary Con for the auctions. The Gary Con auctions have things still brought into them by, the TSR staffers who lived in the area. And still live there, and they bring them in and donate them for the auction, or if not donate, get only a certain percentage back. So one has to use all the means.
All right. Well, we're kind of getting close to wrapping up here, but I did want to ask, and thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful. Do you take any? I know that you're putting them in bookshelves. You're shrink wrap this that. Are there? How hard is it to preserve this stuff as far as do you keep your house at a certain temperature and humidity Sure.
We certainly have temperature and humidity controls. And in the room that they're in, I had to pay a high price to put in 100% UV resistant windows so that there won't be any sun spoiling of the items. So sure, I've taken a lot of care to do things like that to preserve it because, sometimes I'll get things from people and they'll say, would you like me to personalize it to you? And I'll say, no, go ahead and sign it. But, in 100 years, I'm not sure people are going to care who Bill Meinhardt was, but they will care about the item. And so that's my perspective is I was saving this stuff for posterity so that it exists down the road for people. So.
Right. Which is, and you're not, you're doing it all out of your own pocket, which is, really commendable. I wonder, I'm in Arkansas, which gets very humid in the summer. So, you got to, if somebody wants to collect on the level that you're collecting on, you got to take that stuff into account. It doesn't do any good to buy this stuff if it turns around and, deteriorates rapidly because of the environment you're in. So
Sure.
I was going to ask, it doesn't sound like it, but I just want to check. Do you collect any adjacent items? For example, I'm going after all of the D&D action figures that came out in the 80s. Do you collect any of that, even on just a personal level? Like, sure. I fondly remember that.
I don't have action figures. So as I mentioned before, I never did minis until my kids came along. And then I started getting Dwarven Forge stuff, and I started buying the Bones Kickstarters so that we'd have miniatures to play and whatnot. I did not collect ephemera stuff until I was able to buy a Brian Bloom collection a few years ago, and he had a number of ephemera items that I kept those because they were just so cool, like belt buckles and chess set and things like that. But I'm not trying to get everything. I mean, in Spain they came out with D&D meat. I'm not trying to collect that stuff. So
they came out with what?
D&D
meat, like
meat,
Spam?
Yes. Yeah, they sold it as like orc meat, but it was like Spam. Yeah. And so, no, I'm not trying to get one of everything ephemera TSR like that. But I have a number. I have the beach towels, the D&D beach towels.
I remember those.
Yeah, there are 3 of them. So I do have a number of ephemera-related items like that, but I'm not trying to get every single one of them. But they are cool, and I'm happy to have them as part of my collection.
Yeah, that's cool. And just, for those that don't know, Brian Bloom was a early business partner of Gary Gygax and TSR, but he unfortunately passed away fairly early into the whole thing. So, no, wait a minute. I think I may getting him mixed up with Kay.
Brian, his brothers were bought out by Lorraine Williams.
That's okay. That's what it is. I was getting him confused with Kay. I think so.
Yeah, Don Kay died in 1975.
That was it. Yeah, and that was a big blow to Gary, evidently.
Yeah, his best friend.
Yeah, but the Blooms were partners. TSR probably wouldn't exist at the level it did without the Blooms.
The history of this hobby does exist because of those 40 million people who play D&D now, a fraction of them are familiar with the fact that D&D's been around since the 70s. I don't know, 10-20% or something. So a whole bunch of other people could realize that the game's been around for 40 years and there's this cool history behind it. So I'm happy to talk to you and to go over this kind of stuff.
It's totally fascinating. It's fascinating to me to watch and to track through the originally published products and then the stuff around it, like the memos and the, interviews of people recollecting. This stuff kind of came out of nowhere. There was a perfect storm, like we've said before. You had Wargaming and you had Brownstein Gaming and you had Strat-O-Matic and you had all this stuff coming together. But when it came to tabletop role-playing games, they were just making it up and figuring it out. And to watch how things changed and refined, and like I have a lot of respect if somebody comes along today and innovates in tabletop role playing games. However, they're building on 40 years of history and game design and development. I really hold in high respect the people that were there at the beginning, even if they were there just to make a buck. And they didn't have a deep heart for role-playing games or something, because they didn't have any shoulders to stand on as far as role-playing games. So a lot of this stuff, they were just firing from the hip and coming up with really cool stuff. And in retrospect, people can say, well, that was a bad idea or this or that. But I hold it in high regard because anything is easy to look at in retrospect.
Right.
It's hard to be there. And especially before the internet, before, you have no idea of who's doing what with your product when you put it out there. And, are people going to like the initiative system, or are people going to like this, or, ooh, the psionics idea is cool, or, just throwing the stuff out there to see what would stick and innovating is just fascinating. And I'm going to recommend a podcast called the Save for Half podcast, because they do a great job reviewing older games and talking about the innovations and, the thinking behind it and stuff like that. So if people have any interest in this sort of thing, I really recommend Save for Half. So, and a lot of the stuff they talk about, I'm like, well, I got to get a copy of that now.
Amongst my collection, I have about 230, 240, something like that, memos from TSR from, like 1979 to 1984. And so many of them are fascinating, showing internal plans and workings and things like that. And when you mentioned some of the highlights of my collection, one of them is pictured in Art and Arcana, and it's the 20-page line feed printout when Tracy Hickman gave his proposal for Dragonlance to Brian and Gary. And it's date stamped, and just the first page is shown in Art and Arcana. But that came to me from my friend Scott Brand, who's a great collector. And because he has a personal relationship with the Hickmans, and they're Mormons out in Utah, so that came from Scott, and that's an artifact that I'm really happy to have. Literally you can see the genesis of Dragonlance right there with his proposal to come up with 12 modules and books and all kinds of extra things to add on to it, which is what Gary was asking for. He wanted to be able to cross-sell stuff. Mm-hmm. And so it worked perfectly to their designs. And look what Dragonlance has become in the history of the hobby.
Dragonlance has a huge place in my nostalgia, and I love the books. All of it, I was a huge fan of it. In fact, it's probably my favorite, TSR setting or Wizards of the Coast setting is Dragonlance. So wonderful, fun, epic, high fantasy stuff. So that right there is personally exciting for me that you have that, and Tracy Hickman, I've read interviews with him. He showed up at TSR with like nothing. He was broke. If it didn't work out for him at TSR, it wasn't going to work out. Like he said something, he's on record with this. They drove cross country, showed up like on a holiday weekend, and like he didn't have money for food, or I think even like he needed some shoes or something like that for one of it. He had nothing. He took a huge gamble and it paid off. Yep. So his story is personally interesting. He
had made Daystar West Media Productions. He had made the two products, Pharaoh and Rahasia, and he planned actually a 5-module arc, which was going to be Rahasia was for levels 1 to 3 characters, and then Pharaoh was for levels like 4 to 6 characters. Then Eye of the Dragon was going to be for intermediate characters, and then there was Vampire, which became eventually Ravenloft and was published as Ravenloft. And then at the end, it was going to be Brimstone, where you have to go back into hell and try to solve the whole mystery, where an evil cleric had been killing people, but the only way you could get that information is to go into hell and figure it out. Oh. And so that was his 5-module arc. Eventually, 3 of them were published, Rahasia, Pharaoh, and Ravenloft were published by TSR. The other 2 were not published for the longest time, and Scott and the Hickmans and I and Jeff Emery and Mark Greenberg actually published as very limited releases the other 2 of them back about 5 years ago.
Oh, so you were actually involved in the publishing?
Yes.
Oh, that's so cool.
We did it as a very, very limited release, but that's the fuller story of the Hickmans there, and they're coming out from Utah to Lake Geneva.
Yeah, it was. He's really good at kind of recounting his personal history, and I love the anecdote, and we'll finish on this, where Ravenloft basically came from a lot of these old funhouse dungeons they would have rooms and challenges that were there simply for the challenge. They didn't make any sense. There wasn't any reason for them. They were just there to challenge the players. And so they did, if somebody was like, well, what's that doing there? Or it's like, it didn't matter. It was just a fun dungeon to try to defeat. Well, he was talking about there was some dungeon, and for all I know, it was White Plume Mountain. I don't know. I know there's a vampire in White Plume Mountain. It's just sort of there. But he said he was playing, and they encountered a vampire and defeated it. And he's thinking, where did this vampire come from? Why is this vampire here? You know, and so he wasn't satisfied with just that funhouse challenge. He wanted to tell a larger story. And that was the genesis of what led to ultimately Ravenloft. So, and that kind of trivia and minutia and history just absolutely fascinates me. I can't get enough of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really good stuff. Well, Bill, again, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
I'll definitely have you on again. I love to chew the fat on RPG history fairly often on the show. So we'll have you on again to just talk about the history of RPGs and stuff. Fantasy. Maybe you could help us trace the history of fantasy RPGs. You know, because D&D is the big one, but it's not the only one by any means. All right, man. In closing, I got to do this to you. I apologize in advance for any psionic damage, but here we go. I like to close each show with the bad joke of the week. So, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Today, I saw a dwarf climbing down a prison wall. I thought to myself, that's a little condescending.
I like it.
Pretend that you hated it. That'll make me feel better. You go, oh, it was terrible. All right, man.
I'm going to tell my 12 and 9-year-old, and they're going to love it.
Good. That's the target audience. That's the level of sophistication of Shane Plays, baby. Thanks again for your time. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Shane. I appreciate it.
All right, take care.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Hey, this is Shane. Just wanted to wish you, all my listeners and all my family and all my geek family, whoever out there is listening, just want to wish you the very merriest and most joyful of Christmases. And it's a fun time of year, and there's so much cool stuff going on, but also remember the reason for the season. Light came down into darkness. The God of the universe who created us deigned to become flesh to save us. And that is the amazing thing of Christmas. And we can enjoy the trees and the gifts and the family and all that. But I firmly believe that Christ is real and that he is the most ultimate gift. So I love you all. Merry Christmas. And we'll see you next week on Shane Plays.
We kissed on a corner, then danced through the night.